Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. As I mentioned in my last video, I forgot to include junk mail ephemera in my 30-day project for June. I want to see if I can create interesting collages with it. If I can, then I'll add it to my art practice. I have one other video on my channel dedicated to this type of ephemera. I'll link that video in the description area below if you're interested in watching it. That video is over a year old. I haven't been that inspired to use junk mail since then, but I want to give it another try. I have a few design ideas that I want to get down on paper, so let's get started. I decided to use a few of the collages for my 30-day project as references for the collages I'll be creating in this video. I'll be creating a similar collage to this one, but using junk mail as the first layer. I'll be working in this mixed media journal that has 90-pound paper. I had forgotten that I purchased it years ago, so I'm working on completing it. I like to mark a pencil guideline along the gutter of a journal, so I know how much room I have on the page to use. The wax paper I put behind the page I'm working on will help to protect the other pages in the journal. I'll be applying gel medium and paint to this page, so I want to contain both on this page as much as possible. As I go through the junk mail, I'm looking for images or text that are dark in value. Since I'll be painting on top of it, I want those pages to show underneath the paint. Also, I'm using gel medium to adhere the junk mail to the substrate because I want to create a surface that will be able to accept paint. I didn't want to place the junk mail in the same position as the reference. Instead, I'm placing 4 pieces in different sizes in a formation that's like a base of a cruciform composition. It won't necessarily be one, it'll be a loose representation of it. After the gel medium dried, I came in with off-white paint and applied it over the whole surface with an old gift card. Gift cards will drag the paint over the surface, so it won't be a smooth finish. It's a simple detail that can add interest to the artwork. Also, I like it when some of the paper isn't touched by paint. While the paint was still wet, I came in with a thin brush handle and scraped away some of the paint. Not too much, just enough to create a simple pattern. Here are the papers I pulled for the next layer. Like I said, this will be a loose representation of a cruciform composition. It won't have an obvious cross design. I want to mention that as I build this paper layer, I'm being mindful of it being balanced and cohesive. I'm constantly thinking about having all 3 values represented, light, mid, and dark. Also, using the same color paper in different locations on the surface helps to guide the viewer's eyes around the artwork. I'll add music while you watch me finish and come back and talk about the final collage. Here's the finished collage. As you notice, I was unsure about the placement of the mustard colored papers. Sometimes I need to leave a paper element unglued while working on adding other papers. Also, it helps me to trim the edges. This helps me to visualize how the final artwork will look like. I like that this composition is a loose representation of a cruciform. I encourage you to use the standard compositions as a loose guide. What's that saying? Learn the rules, then break them. One more thing before we move on to the next collage. A viewer named Lori asked if I could include grayscale images of the artwork I create in my videos, so it's easier to see all three values. I made a note to try to include these images more often. Here's the grayscale image of this collage. The light value is the first layer with the painted junk mail. Mid-tone values are the mustard and turquoise papers. Dark values are the red and burgundy papers, along with the unpainted sections of the junk mail layer. For the next junk mail collage, I'm using this 30-day collage as reference. I mentioned in the video where I reviewed all the collages created for this project that I like the layout of the lime, orange, and green papers. It has movement. It helps to guide the viewer's eyes up and down the artwork. I'll be using only this section of the reference for this next collage. I decided to use text junk mail for the ground layer. I prefer to orient text so it's either upside down or sideways. This way it's not easy for the viewer to read. I want the viewer to consider it as collage element, not reading material. I ended up using mostly light value text junk mail. My thought process was that it would be a good ground layer against the painted papers that will be glued on top. One more thing, I'm using a glue stick as the adhesive. It wasn't necessary to use gel medium because I wasn't painting on top of the junk mail. I'm doing this step off camera to save time. I'll add music while you watch me create this layer, then come back and discuss the painted papers layer. Here's the papers I pulled. I decided to replicate the 3-color design from the reference collage. I didn't need to pull too many different colored papers. Since I'm replicating this paper layer except in different colors, I don't have anything else to add at this point. I'll add music and come back when it's finished. Here's the finished collage. I don't think it's as successful as the reference. To my eyes, the painted paper area doesn't stand out from the ground. I thought by using dark values of the burgundy and green papers, along with the bright lime yellow paper, that this layer would be more pronounced. Some ideas to fix it would be to outline it either with paint or a paint pen or marker. Or another option, if I wanted to recreate it, would be to paint a color in this area first, then glue the painted papers on top. I decided to leave it as is. I like to keep unsuccessful artworks that are in journals or sketchbooks as is for reference. Before we move on to the final collage, here's the grayscale version. To be honest, I like this version better. You can see all 3 values. Also, the painted paper layer reads as a strong focal point. This is the reference for this next collage. I'm using the black pen details and the dome shapes as inspiration. I wanted to try another collage that uses junk mail as an all-over ground layer. If I decide to use junk mail for my art practice, I think it would work best in this way. This time I'm using a mix of light and dark value papers and text and image papers. I brought out gel medium to use again because I'll be painting on top of the junk mail ground. I'll add music and come back once this layer is completed. Once the gel medium dried, I started with the next layer, which is applying paint. I brought out off-white, red light, which is technically pink, and green-blue light. I'm starting by applying watered-down off-white paint with a brush over the whole surface. I did this step because I wanted to make sure the junk mail layer underneath would be somewhat visible. Also, I decided not to paint with a gift card this time because I had already done it for the first collage. While the off-white paint was still wet, I applied the pink and light green-blue paint. I didn't think it was necessary to wait until the off-white paint dried, since the other colors were light values as well. Using the pink paint, I decided to recreate the shape from the reference that is a dome connected to an oval. This time the shape is larger because I wanted to play with scale, larger shape on a small element. It gave a different look than the same shape on the reference. Then I added two light green-blue dome shapes. Again, I'm playing with scale, so these shapes are larger than the reference. I didn't want to add too many because I wanted to have room to add painted papers next. Again, I'm playing with scale. Since the pink and light green-blue shapes are large, I'm cutting the painted paper shapes smaller, then group them together to form vertical elements. As you'll see, I'm only creating two of these elements. The size of this substrate is approximately 5 inches by 8.5 inches, so I didn't want the collage to be too busy looking. There's one more detail I'll be adding once this layer is completed. At this point, I'll add music, then come back when it's done. I brought out the same two pens that I used for the reference collage. I'm starting with the Posca pen because it has a thicker nib. Like the reference shape, I'm drawing continuous, uneven horizontal lines, filling in the whole shape. This time I wanted the line work to be more pronounced, so that's why I'm using a pen with a thicker nib. By the way, I'm using the shop towel as a barrier between my hand and the substrate. It was very hot when I was filming, so I didn't want any oils from my hand transferring onto the artwork. I I had to think about what I wanted to draw on the two dome shapes. I didn't want to draw the same type of lines as I did for the pink shape. I wanted these shapes to be different, but still have bold line details. I decided to mimic the dome shape, but with uneven line work. The last detail, creating the thin diagonal lines with a gel pen, was an afterthought. Not sure if it was needed. If I decide to recreate this collage and add this detail, I would do it before adding the small colored papers, or maybe before painting the pink and light green blue elements. Here's the grayscale version. It has all three values, but I'm not sure if the design is successful. It looks a bit disjointed to me. After creating these collages, I think the way I want to include junk mail in my art practice is to use it for the ground layer. Currently, I like using papers that I create myself as the main elements in my artwork. Of course, that may change over time. I'm curious to know if you use junk mail in your art practice. If you do, how do you use it? That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch it. Take care.